When Prince Louis of France invaded England in 1216, he met unexpected resistance in the deep and dense forests of southern England. A man named William of Kensham, along with a group of partisans, struck fear into the hearts of the French. Much like the legendary Robin Hood and his daring companions, they lay in wait with their bows, attacking French knights whenever they ventured into the forest. Their weapons were cunning, surprise, and terror. They would appear out of nowhere, ambush a convoy, kill a few stragglers, and vanish silently into the shadows of the woods. William of Kensham and his men played a crucial role in repelling the French invasion during the First Barons' War. They are among England's unsung heroes, admired by their contemporaries, but forgotten by history. Almost, that is. Perhaps part of their legacy lives on in the legend of Robin Hood. Our story takes us back to a turbulent chapter of England's past. The country was ruled by King John Lackland, best known as the villain in the Robin Hood stories. In reality, John was an incompetent tyrant. In 1215, his subjects forced him to sign the famous Magna Carta, a document that outlined the rights and freedoms of the nobility in relation to the king. But John had no intention of limiting his power, and soon had the Magna Carta declared invalid by the Pope. This sparked a civil war. Outnumbered by the king's mercenary armies, the rebels turned to Prince Louis of France for help. Louis crossed the English Channel with an invasion army in May, and within a few months he had occupied almost a third of England. The nobles in this area faced a grim choice: join Louis or flee, leaving their subjects at the mercy of the ruthless French. When Louis worked to clear the last pockets of resistance, most notably the mighty castle of Dover, a common man named William gathered the bravest of these abandoned people around him in the depths of the forest. Far behind enemy lines, Willikin of the Wield, as he soon came to be known, prepared for a guerrilla war that would earn him fame throughout England. Little is known about William's life before the war. According to the chronicler Roger of Wendover, he was a young man at the time of the invasion, probably around 20 to 25 years old. He was likely not from the area. Historian Sean MacLean suggests that William may have come to England in 1215, with the mercenaries King John brought from Flanders to defend himself against rebellious subjects. He did not take the nickname Kensham or Cassingham until later, when he settled in the estate of the same name located between Sandhurst and Rolvenden in Kent. Nevertheless, he must have spent some time in southern England, as he was already very familiar with the so-called Wield when the invasion began. The Wield is an extensive forested region stretching across Kent, Sussex and Surrey to Hampshire. In the Middle Ages, it was a rugged and inaccessible area that served as a refuge for many outlaws. Winding paths led through dense undergrowth, over deep gorges and rocky hills, with only a few isolated farmsteads scattered along the way. For an army, the Wield was virtually impenetrable, but for a partisan like William, it was perfect. According to Roger of Wendover, William quickly gathered, quote, 1,000 archers and took to the isolated places and forests which abounded in that region. While the 1,000 number should not be taken literally, William's forces still amounted to a small army by the standards of the time, an impressive feat, since even wealthy landowners could rarely raise troops on that scale. However, these partisans were not professional soldiers. A few may have had prior combat experience, and could therefore prepare their comrades for the challenges ahead, but most were simple men from the countryside, armed with nothing more than the bows and arrows they used in everyday life. To prevail against the heavily armored French soldiers, William and his men relied on a tactic used successfully by partisans throughout history. They followed the principles of guerrilla warfare, striking the invaders in many small, secretive actions. Quote, all the time, reports Wendover, they attacked and disrupted the enemy, and as a result of their intense resistance, many thousand Frenchmen were slain. End quote. Their greatest advantage was their intimate knowledge of the Wield. Many were born and raised there, and could rely on a network of friends and family who secretly supported them. According to Sean McGlynn, some may even have led double lives, fighting the English from the comfort of their own homes. These men were at home in the forest. They knew exactly where to hide, which winding paths to take to shake off pursuers, and where to set traps for their enemies. In open battle, they would have stood little chance against Louis's men, but in the forest, they were vastly superior. We know very little about exactly how William operated. This is partly because he remained as secretive as possible, and partly because the reports of his fighting lack sufficient detail. It is worth remembering that this was a time when it was not always possible to know the whereabouts of a king, let alone a common man hiding in the forest. What we do know is that William's men relied on the methods of so-called small war. Their most secretive weapons were ambushes, raids, and fear. They moved in small, highly mobile groups, lightly armored and almost impossible for the French scouts to find, let alone catch. Often they avoided direct confrontations, instead crippling enemy communications and supply lines, picking off stragglers or setting traps for the French. The bow was the perfect weapon for this kind of warfare. Light and flexible, it allowed partisans to move faster than Louis's heavily armored troops. They roamed the forests like the wind, while French infantry repeatedly got stuck in the undergrowth. And that's not even to mention the men-at-arms. With their bows, the partisans could strike silently from a distance, while keeping themselves out of danger. Their targets often didn't even notice them until they heard the whiz of an arrow, and someone dropped to the ground. By the time they recovered from the shock, the archers had long since vanished into the dense forest. It was this very unpredictability that struck fear into the hearts of the French. They knew that no mercy awaited them, making them all the more reluctant to enter the dark, unfamiliar forests. William exploited this fear to the fullest, operating far behind enemy lines in French-controlled territory with virtually no infrastructure. He turned the forest into his fortress and fear into his weapon. Anyone who fell into his hands could expect no mercy. William and his partisans were so successful that even King John took notice. In September of 1216, the king personally thanked William in a letter for his support, and soon afterward sent funds to aid the resistance in the Wield. When John Lackland died in October of 1216, and his 9-year-old son, Henry of the House of the Plantagenets, succeeded him to the throne, William remained loyal to the crown. If you want to understand more about the political backdrop to this time period, the rule of the royal house of the Plantagenets, we recommend you read Sharon K. Penman's Plantagenet series. To be clear, this is historical fiction, but it is well researched and gives you a good idea about the time period leading up to King John Lackland's reign. Now, we love sinking into historical fiction on the go, which is why we've been Audible users for 6 years. If you want to start listening to the Plantagenet series, you can actually get a free book and support our channel by the same time by signing up for an Audible trial using our affiliate link. It costs you nothing extra, and when you sign up, we get a small compensation. Thanks for considering it, and now let's get back to the video. The king's death fundamentally changed the situation in England. Suddenly, the main cause of the nobles' discontent had vanished, and they realized their rebellion had opened the door to a French invasion. Many abandoned the rebellion and pledged allegiance to Henry III, making Louis's position far more precarious. By early 1217, Louis had run out of money and troops. He was forced to agree a truce with the English, break off the siege of Dover Castle, and return to London. As he made his way south to fetch reinforcements from France and replenish his war chest, the moment was ripe for William's masterstroke. He set a trap for Louis that nearly cost him his entire army. William's partisans were already on Louis's heels as he marched through Kent and Sussex. They prowled the woods along the roads, systematically destroying anything edible in the French army's path, and capturing men who stayed too far from the marching column. By the time Louis finally left the Wield behind, his troops were starving, exhausted, and demoralized. just as William had planned. They were now vulnerable enough for an ambush. When the French army caught sight of Louis, they longed for a restful night behind secure walls. But just before they reached the town, the bushes and hills on either side of the road suddenly sprang to life. Arrows and stones rained down like thick hail, knocking down dozens of unprepared soldiers. With great difficulty, Louis managed to regroup his troops and fight his way out of the ambush. In a rush, he marched east along the coast, intending to seek shelter in Winchelsea and await the arrival of his fleet. The partisans stayed close behind, allowing him not a moment's rest. Louis found Winchelsea deserted. The townspeople were gone, and the storehouses had been emptied. He immediately sent messengers to London to request reinforcements and supplies, but none returned. Every one of the men he sent was blocked by William, who had surrounded Winchelsea with a tight cordon. His partisans had destroyed bridges behind the French, blocked the roads, and swarmed through the forests. Even the inhabitants of Winchelsea were in on the plan. They had fled to Rye under the cover of night and fog, taking all their supplies with them. Louis had walked straight into a trap. William could not confront him head-on, but it didn't matter. If the French failed to break through the blockade, they would simply starve in Winchelsea. Louis then sent stronger units to try to break through to London, but the partisans were so dominant in the Wield that they stood no chance. The biographer of William Marshal, Henry's regent, writes that William, quote, was not in the mood to play games, having many of them beheaded. Around 1,000 French soldiers never returned from the woods. Soon, the situation in Winchelsea seemed hopeless. Hunger and fear drove the French into despair. William's grip on the forest was complete. There was no escape. In the end, it took a major operation by the French fleet to save Louis. He escaped across the English Channel at the last moment, and the partisans melted away into the dense undergrowth. When Louis returned in April to continue his invasion of England, he saw dark columns of smoke rising above his siege camp at Dover. A little later, a messenger brought him the grim news. William and his archers had attacked the garrison, overpowered the guards, and set fire to the camp and the siege engines. Under these circumstances, the prince could not risk landing at Dover. Furious, he ordered his fleet to Sandwich, went ashore, and burned the town to the ground. This was not simply retaliation, it marked the beginning of a new strategy. Louis aimed to crush the rebels by wiping out their supporters. Sandwich was followed in May by Hythe and Romney, and several small towns near Dover. But this course of action was largely ineffectual. The edges of the forest had become an increasingly impenetrable barrier for the French, and the partisans now had reinforcements. Oliver Fitzroy, an illegitimate son of John Lackland, had joined William with the regular troops for the attack on the siege camp, and together they worked to keep the French at bay. However, the stalemate did not last long. On the 20th of May, William Marshal defeated part of the French forces at the Battle of Lincoln, and shortly afterward, the English fleet delivered the final blow to the invasion at the Battle of Sandwich. After the war, William was richly rewarded for his bravery and loyalty. Henry III granted him lands in Essex, appointed him Warden of the 700s of the Wield, making him one of the most important men in the region. According to official records, William served his role for 40 years, before his death in June of 1257. He bequeathed his estate, Cassingham or Kensham, to his son Ralph, but William's story did not end with his death. For more than a century, historians have debated whether the legend of Robin Hood was inspired by a real historical person, and William is one of the leading candidates. His fight against the French transformed him from a man of humble origins into a nationally known hero. Even in the highest circles, people knew about Willie of the Wield. Historian Sean McGlynn suggests that his fame was due, at least in part, to a royal propaganda campaign. The story of a common man rising up against the invader was exactly what the royalists needed to inspire the ordinary people to join the resistance. Precisely because William's story was so well known, McLean believes it may have inspired or at least influenced, the legend of Robin Hood. In fact, there are striking parallels between the two. Like Robin Hood in the earliest versions of the tale, William was of lower birth, branded an outlaw by his enemies, and led a band of archers fighting in the forests against an oppressor. There's even a link to Nottingham and Sherwood Forest, since Nottingham was one of the key royalist strongholds and William was almost certainly in contact with them. As tempting as Maclean's theory may be, the name Robin Hood ultimately became a collective label for countless robbers and outlaws, a kind of John Doe of medieval bandits. His character likely represents the fusion of hundreds of different tales. The story of William of Kensham, known in his lifetime as the hero of the forest, may well be one of them. And even if it isn't, one thing is certain: William deserves far more recognition than history has granted him so far. Thanks for watching. Channels like ours depend on your support to keep exploring these lesser-known corners of history. For just $3 a month on Patreon, you can help us make even better content, and you'll get early previews and access to polls that let you decide what we cover next. Every bit of support makes a real difference. Thanks again, and we'll see you in the next one.